Be'ezras Hashem, with Hashem's help, we begin today the final set of laws in the third book of the Rambam, Hilchos Megillah v'Chanukah, the laws of reading the Megillah and of celebrating Chanukah. And as the Rambam always does, he tells us which mitzvahs are going to be discussed in this set of laws. And over here, we have something interesting. The Rambam says, Yesh bichlolon shtei mitzvahs aseh midivrei soifrim. In this set of laws, we're only going to be discussing two positive commandments that are rabbinic. Ve'enon min haminyan. They're not part of the count. Of course, the count refers to the 613 biblical mitzvahs. That's the main subject of the Rambam's 14 books. However, he also covers, as he told us in the introduction, the Sheva mitzvot de Rabbanan, the 7 rabbinic commandments. This set of laws is fully dedicated to mitzvahs that are rabbinic. And it's reminiscent of a set of laws that we had earlier in this book, the laws of Eruvin, which also discussed a mitzvah that was only rabbinic in nature. Here too, we discussed the mitzvahs related to Megillah and Chanukah that are only rabbinic in nature. And of course, the mitzvahs are the mitzvah to read the Megillah on Purim and to light the Chanukah lights on Chanukah. Ubiyur shtei mitzvahs elu, biprakim elu. The explanation of these two mitzvahs will come in the following 4 chapters. 2 chapters dedicated to Megillah and 2 chapters dedicated to Chanukah. I know during the Jewish year, Chanukah comes before Purim, but historically speaking, the miracle of Purim took place before the miracle of Chanukah. The miracle of Purim took place during the 70 years between the first and second temples, and the miracle of Chanukah took place during the second temple era, and that's why Megillah comes before Chanukah. The Rebbe once noted, actually twice, on 2 separate occasions, that the Rambam is super precise. Everything about the Rambam is precise. His wording in structuring halachot, but not only the wording in the specific laws, also the way he groups and orders the sets of laws. So if Megillah and Chanukah are 2 separate subjects in Judaism, we would expect that they should be in 2 separate sets of laws. What's wrong with making Hilchot Megillah and then Hilchot Chanukah? Why do they have to be together, Megillah and Chanukah? Now, we had earlier in this book the laws of Shofar, Sukkah, Lulav. Right? They all came together as well. But that was because they were all part of 1 month. One month of Tishrei. But when you're dealing with two separate concepts, then you don't put them together. And the Rebbe explained once that it's because there's a common denominator between these 2 mitzvahs and that they're both rabbinic. And because they're both rabbinic, that was reason enough to put them together. But on a deeper level, the Rebbe said 2 mystical explanations for this. Number 1, Chanukah and Purim both had stories of wars. The Jews fought a war. When it came to Purim, they fought a war because Haman had decreed that all Jews should be annihilated on the 13th of Adar, and the Jews were given permission to fight back. On Chanukah, the Maccabees fought the war. And while there was both times a physical war, the goal of the war was different. When it came to Purim, the Jews were fighting for their life, physical, bodily life. When it came to Chanukah, the Jews were fighting for their neshama, for their soul, because the Greeks didn't really want the Jews to be annihilated. They really just wanted the Jews to become assimilated and to keep their religion. And the war was more of a spiritual war in that way. And so in that way, Purim represents the guf, the body, and Chanukah represents the neshama, the soul. And since by a Jew, the body and soul are connected, so it reflects itself also in Jewish law, that when talking about the halachas of Megillah and Chanukah, we put them together to remind ourselves that our body and our souls are interlinked, they can never be divided. Even deeper, the Rebbe says, this is one of the proofs that the Rambam studied Kabbalah. There's a big controversy if the Rambam himself was a Mekubal, and according to Chabad tradition, the Rambam certainly was, definitely at the end of his life, studied Kabbalah. In Kabbalah, we are taught that every holiday corresponds to a different one of the 10 Sefirot. Chanukah and Purim correspond to the Sefirot of Netzach and Hod. And according to Kabbalah, Netzach and Hod are not considered to be independent. They're considered to be Trei Palgei, 2 halves of one whole. And because according to Kabbalah, they're 2 halves of one whole, the Rambam puts them together to reflect that Kabbalistic truth, that Chanukah and Purim are really part of one unit. Even more so, there is a debate among the Kabbalists which of the holidays are Netzach and which is Hod. Is Chanukah Netzach and Purim is Hod? Or Purim is Netzach and Chanukah is Hod? So the Rambam puts them together to remind us that they're literally completely one package. They're 2 halves of one whole to the point that we don't even know which one is which. And so here we have a Kabbalistic remez, a Kabbalistic allegory in the fact that the Rambam puts these 2 halachot together in one set of laws. Be that as it may, we are beginning the laws of Megillah and Chanukah, and we begin with Megillah, the laws related to the mitzvah of reading the Megillah on Purim. The Rambam does not go through the history of the story of Purim. Of course, we all know it from reading the Megillah every year. Achashverosh was the king of the world. He made a feast for all the countries for 180 days. Afterwards, he made a more local feast, 7 days for the people in his community in Shushan. And that's when a tragic story happened where his wife was supposed to come down at his behest and she refused, and he had her killed. Because of that, a competition was made, a beauty pageant, where all the girls of the kingdom were to compete to become the next queen. Esther was chosen. Esther, of course, was Jewish. Mordechai told her not to reveal her Jewish identity, and that came into use later because Achashverosh had a minister, Haman, who was very wicked. He was appointed as basically the prime minister, the chief of staff. Achashverosh commanded that all people should bow to him. Mordechai didn't want to bow. And because of that, Haman got mad at all the Jewish people. He made a decree to kill all the Jewish people. Achashverosh agreed, and Esther, who was in the palace as the Jewish queen, was able to intercede by a whole series of events, making a feast, etc., until ultimately she revealed that she was Jewish, and Haman's decree was including her, and because of that, the Jewish people were saved. In the literal context of the story, they weren't actually saved, because the decree of annihilation was still in effect. Achashverosh gave them permission to fight back. The Jewish people fought back on the day which was supposed to be the day of annihilation, the 13th of Adar, and they won the war on that day, resting on the 14th day of Adar. And because of that, the 14th day of Adar was instituted as a holiday of Purim. For the Jews in Shushan, the war raged another day, the 14th of Adar, and it was finished on the 15th of Adar. And so the Jews in Shushan's day of rest was enacted for them as a holiday, and Rambam will talk about this today, the concept of there being 2 different days when Purim is celebrated. Some celebrate on the 14th of Adar, and some on the 15th of Adar. To remember the holiday every year, Esther asked the sages of her time to make a mitzvah of reading the Megillah each year, rereading the story to remind ourselves of the miracles that Hashem did for us. The sages agreed. They made Purim into an eternal holiday. Until today, we celebrate by reading the Megillah on Purim. There are other mitzvahs of Purim as well, which we'll discuss tomorrow. Those are mitzvahs of Mishloach Manot, giving gifts of food to a friend, Matanot Le'avyonim, giving gifts to the poor, Tzedakah, and a Mishteh V'Simcha, to have a joyous feast. But the main mitzvah, the main feature of Purim is the mitzvah of reading the Megillah, and that's the subject that occupies most of the 2 chapters dedicated to the laws of Purim, and that actually reflects itself in the name of the laws. The Rambam calls it Megillah v'Chanukah. He doesn't call it Purim and Chanukah, because the first 2 chapters are mostly dedicated to the Megillah, whereas the other ones are, the laws about Chanukah are more focused on Chanukah in general. Perek Rishon, let's begin, says the Rambam, chapter 1, Halacha Aleph. Kriyas HaMegillah Bizmana. To read the Megillah of Esther, in its proper time, mitzvah sasei midivrei seifrim, is a positive commandment rabbinically. The matter is well known that this was enacted by the prophets. Esther lived in the time period that was the end of the prophet period. That's why it's called Takanat Nevi'im, because the sages in her time, who were all considered to be, or mostly considered to be prophetic, they are the ones that enacted this reading of the Megillah, so it's an enactment of the prophets. Every Jew is obligated to read the Megillah. Anoshim v'noshim, both men and women, as the Talmud says. The women also were included in the miracle. Many times women aren't bound to time-bound mitzvahs. But over here, because they were part of the miracle, they have to read the Megillah. V'geidim v'avadim v'shuchrarim, even converts, who you would think their ancestors weren't part of the miracle. They weren't Jewish. They weren't redeemed. Why should they have to read the Megillah? The Rogachover Gaon, the Tzafnas Paneach, points to a verse in the end of the Megillah which says that they enacted that the Megillah should be read forever for the Jewish people, ve'al kol hanilvim alehem, as well as all those who attach themselves to them. That includes converts. Converts too, because they become part of the Jewish family, celebrate the Jewish holidays, and they have to also read the Megillah. Va'avadim mishuchrarim, as well as freed slaves, who again also weren't born Jewish, entered the Jewish faith. In the same way, they go into the category of hanilvim alehem, and they have to also read the Megillah. So we even educate children to read the Megillah, so they become familiar with it, and when it's time, and they're bar bat mitzvah, they will be able to read the Megillah properly. How extreme is the mitzvah to read the Megillah that even Kohanim, during their temple service, and remember, Purim was celebrated during the temple times, because the miracle happened during the 70 years between the first and second temples, such that for the full 420 years that the second temple stood, Purim was celebrated every year as a holiday. So even Kohanim, who were serving in the temple, doing the service, mevatlin avaydasan ubayin lishmaya mikra Megillah, would cancel, whereas the commentaries explain more like delay. You couldn't fully cancel the service, but you would delay the service in the temple, to come hear the reading of the Megillah. V'chein mevatlim Talmud Torah lishmaya mikra Megillah. We also cancel Torah study. If you have a usual shir, a usual class that goes on at night, every night, on Purim night, you cancel the class and you go to hear the reading of the Megillah. Kal v'chomer lishar mitzvah shel Torah shekula nidchin mipnei mikra Megillah. How much more so any other mitzvah in the Torah should be pushed off in the face of reading the Megillah. The Rebbe once asked, and the commentaries discussed it as well, why is it considered canceling Torah study to come hear the Megillah? The Megillah is also Torah. So either way, you're learning Torah. And from here we see a very valuable lesson, that the Megillah reading is just a reading. It's a very superficial learning. You don't get to go deep while the Megillah is read. In a Torah class, you can go deep. Learning Torah superficially, when you could be learning it on a deeper level, is called Bitul Torah. In a way, it's called canceling Torah study. Because if you have the potential to learn at a higher level and you're only studying at a lower level, you're not doing your full potential. So for the mitzvah, indeed, we do Bitul Torah, but it should be a lesson for our lives, that if we could be doing more than what we're doing, the Torah study that we're doing now, in a way, could be Bitul Torah. We have to achieve a higher potential. Do what we really can do. Learn what we really can learn to fulfill our truest chiyuv, our truest obligation of learning Torah. Concludes the Rambam, there is nothing in Jewish religion that gets pushed away, that is powerful enough to push away the reading of the Megillah, except for what's called a meis mitzvah, a dead person who it's a mitzvah to bury him because there's nobody else to bury him. You come across a dead corpse on the side of the road. There are no relatives, there are no caretakers, and you're burying him. That overrides the reading of the Megillah. Somebody who meets, somebody who encounters a dead corpse, and there's nobody around, he should bury him first, and only then go ahead and read the Megillah. Halacha Beis, Echad HaKoirei ve'Echad HaShemea min HaKoirei Yotze Yedei Chevasei. While it's true that in the last halacha we worded the mitzvah as reading the Megillah, in the end of the day, whether you read the Megillah yourself or you listen to somebody reading the Megillah, you fulfilled your obligation. V'hu, provided sheyishma mipi mishu chayav bikriyasa, that you're listening to somebody reading and that reader is himself obligated in the mitzvah of reading the Megillah. Lefichach, therefore, were the reader to be a child or a mentally unstable person who is not obligated in the mitzvahs, you, the adult who hears from such a person, would not be considered to have fulfilled his obligation. Typically, when these people that are exempt from mitzvahs come up as a list, we have three people in the list. Shotev Katan, the mentally unstable, and the child, as well as Cheresh, a deaf person. And the Rambam doesn't mention it here. Some people explain that to mean that if a deaf person were to read the Megillah, then you could fulfill your obligation. But that's not true. A deaf person is not obligated in the mitzvahs, therefore he doesn't fulfill on behalf of other people. The reason the Rambam doesn't mention it is because it's highly unlikely that a deaf person would be able to read the Megillah out loud. Bottom line is he cannot fulfill your obligation on your behalf. Gimel, mitzvah likres es kula. The mitzvah is to read the entirety of the Megillah. Of course, the Megillah is a written record of the Purim story. In the Talmud, there's a debate how much of the Megillah must be read nowadays to fulfill the mitzvah. And some say only a couple of chapters, only where the actual miracle takes place. But the mitzvah, halachically, as it's decided by the codifiers, is that we have to read the entire thing, from the beginning to the end. In addition, we read the Megillah twice. The mitzvah is to read it by night of Purim and by day of Purim. The entirety of the night is kosher to read the Megillah by night, and the entirety of the daytime is kosher for the daytime Megillah reading. Before reading the Megillah at night, we make three blessings. They are the following. Blessed are you, God, our God, King of the universe. For sanctifying us with your commandments and commanding us about the reading of the Megillah. That's bracha number one. Number two, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, she'asa nisim la'aveseinu bayamim hahem bizman hazeh. Blessed are you, Hashem, King of the universe, who has done miracles for our ancestors in those days at this time. In other words, today is the day of Purim, and in those days, on that day, the miracle was done. Other texts of the Rambam have bayamim hahem ubizman hazeh. Thank you, Hashem, for doing miracles for our ancestors in those days and at this time. In other words, we also talk about personal miracles that Hashem does at this time. Blessing number three, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, she'echayanu v'kiyimanu v'yigiyanu lizman hazeh. Classic blessing for a mitzvah that comes on occasion. Blessed are you, Hashem, for granting us life, existence, and allowing us to reach this time. And the Rambam rules significantly, by daytime we do not make the Shecheyanu blessing before the reading of the Megillah. Today in many communities we actually do. And the way we get out of it, because the Rambam seems to be reasonable. Shecheyanu you make only when the holiday comes. You made it by night, what's the point of making it again by day? So the way we get out of this issue is that when we make the Shecheyanu blessing, we also have in mind the other mitzvahs of Purim, which only apply by day. Gifts of food, giving gifts to the poor, the feast. Those are mitzvahs that are new today. So before we read the Megillah, we make Shecheyanu, and we have those mitzvahs in mind as well. But the Rambam rules, no Shecheyanu by day. In places where the custom is to make a blessing also after the reading of the Megillah, mevarech, you make the following blessing as we actually do. We only make this blessing though if there's a minyan. If there's a minyan present, we do this blessing after the Megillah, and the blessing goes as follows, the Rambam's text, and up on the screen we have the text that is used today, but the Rambam goes like this, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech ha'olam, blessed are you God, our God, King of the universe, Hakeil harav esrivenu, the God who champions our fights, the Hadanas dinenu, who executes judgment on our behalf, the Hanekem esnikmasenu, avenges our vengeance, the Hanifra lanu mitzarenu, he pays back, he exacts retribution from those who trouble us, and he pays back all the enemies of our souls. Baruch atah Hashem, blessed are you God, Kel, the Almighty, Hanifra la'amu Yisrael mikol tzareim, who exacts retribution on behalf of his nation Israel from all those who cause them trouble. Hakel HaMashiach, the God of salvation. Again, as we make the blessing today, there's a couple of textual differences, but the body is the same. We thank Hashem for acting on our behalf and saving us from all of our oppressors. Halacha Daled Ezehu Zman Kiriyasa. What is the time of reading the Megillah? Now, we don't mean the time during the day. We already said by night and by day. Which day do we read the Megillah? So, of course, we know we do it on the holiday of Purim. But halachically, Zmanim Harbe Tiknu Lachachamim. The sages originally enacted many times for the Megillah to be read. There are many days that are appropriate for the reading of the Megillah. Shenemar, as it says, Bizmanehem, in their times, in the plural. This is the verse where the original Purim was enacted to be an everlasting holiday. And it says that letters were sent out to all the Jewish people, Lekayem, to fulfill Es Yemei Purim Ha'ele, these days of Purim, Bizmanehem, during their times. Typically, the days of Purim, you would say in their time. Why in their times, plural? Because there are many times that the obligation of the Megillah reading could be fulfilled. Ve'elu hein zmanei kriyasa. The following are the outline of the times appropriate for reading the Megillah. Kol Medina, Shahaisa Mukefes Chayma, Mimei Yehishua Binun. Any province, any city which was surrounded by a wall from the times of Joshua, Yehoshua bin Nun, who led the Jews into Israel after Moshe, Bein Ba'aretz, Bein B'chutz Ha'aretz, whether this city is in Israel or in the diaspora, Afal Pi She'ein La Achshav Chayma, even if there is no wall right now, but there was a wall around it in the days of Joshua, Kairin B'chamisha Asar Ba'adar, they read the Megillah on the 15th day of Adar. We know Purim as the 14th day, but the walled cities celebrate the day after, 15th of Adar. Umedina Zuhi Anikras Krach. This type of province, this type of locale is called in halacha a krach. Krach is the code name for a walled city. Any province, any locale, which was not surrounded by a wall in the days of Joshua. Even if today it is walled, those provinces read the Megillah on the 14th day of Adar. This is the classic day of the Megillah reading as we know it. This type of locale is called in halacha Ir. Ir usually means a regular city. In the context of Megillah, it's a reference to a city which is unwalled and therefore reads the Megillah on the 14th day of Adar. Hey, Shushan Habira, the capital Shushan, where the miracle took place. The miracle of Purim took place. Even though, as a matter of practice, it was not walled in the days of Joshua. Nevertheless, in Shushan, they read the Megillah till today on the 15th day of Adar, Sheba Hoya Hanes, because that's where the miracle was. Shanemar, as it says, V'noyach b'chamisha asar boy. They rested on the 15th, as I mentioned to you before. All the Jews around the world fought back on the 13th of Adar and rested on the 14th. The Megillah here says, V'hayehudim asher b'Shushan. The Jews in Shushan, Nikalu. They went to war also on the 13th day of Adar, but also the war raged for another day, Uva Arba'a Asarbo, V'noach B'chamisha Asarbo. They only rested on the 15th day of Adar, and therefore V'aso Oto, they made that day into their day of feasting and rejoicing, and that's the day on which they read the Megillah. Now, since the miracle of Purim happened so much later in history, The Rambam asks the obvious question: V'lama talu hadavar b'mei Yeshua? Why does the matter depend on whether the city was walled in the days of Joshua? Maybe if walled is what makes it or breaks it, then you should go walled in times of Purim. Why did they make the matter dependent on Joshua's times? Says the Rambam, to honor Israel. Israel was desolate at the time of the miracle of Purim. Jews had been exiled to Babylon. They were out of Israel. Israel was destroyed. Israel was in ruins. And the Jews wanted to honor Shushan, wanted to honor Israel. So they should be able to read the Megillah on certain areas of Israel, like the people of Shushan, and will consider those cities in Israel as if they had a wall, and even though in the time of Purim, they were actually destroyed. Since they were surrounded by a wall in the time when the Jews first conquered Israel, days of Yehoshua, they're going to read on the 15th, and through this, there will be now a remembrance for Israel in this miracle. And so they moved the history back, and they said whoever had a wall in times of Joshua, they're going to read on the 15th. There's an interesting question in the commentaries. What happens if the city had a wall only for part of Joshua's life, and not for the entirety of it? Would they read on the 15th or the 14th? And it's discussed at length. It depends on the text in the Jerusalem Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud. But the Rambam would seem to imply that if it's about giving honor to Israel, it doesn't matter when it went up. As long as it was up in Joshua's times, that's it. The honor to Israel would be accorded to them. They read on the 15th. Halacha Vav. So we've discussed the walled city, the 15th of Adar. We've discussed the unwalled city. They read the Megillah on the 14th of Adar. Now there is a third category called the villages. B'nei HaKfarim, the people of the villages. She'enam miskabtzim b'batei knesiyos ella b'sheni u'v'chamishi. There wasn't a lot of people. They lived in scattered areas. So they would only gather in their local synagogues twice a week, on Mondays and Thursdays. Tiknu lahem, the sages enacted for them, sheyu makdimin v'koidim b'yem haknisa. They should push the day of the reading forward and read on the day of gathering closest to Purim. So the day of gathering, again, was always on a Monday or a Thursday. So the Monday or Thursday immediately preceding Purim, that would be the day that they would read the Megillah. And the Rambam now walks through many of the possible configurations of Purim falling out and when the Megillah would be read in the villages. So let's begin. The Rambam says, Keitzad, what does this look like? Im chol yem arba'a asar liyas b'sheni ay b'chamishi. If the day of the 14th, if Purim itself came out to be on Monday or on Thursday, Monday or Thursday, the villages are getting together anyways. So here you see in the calendar, Yud Dalet is both. I just put it both on one calendar. Either Monday or Thursday. Kairin bay bayayim. They would read on that day because they're anyways in shul. So in this way, they would end up reading the Megillah on the same day that the world at large was reading the Megillah. But if Purim, the 14th day of Adar, fell out to be on a day of the week different to Monday and Thursday, makdimin v'koirin b'sheni b'chamishi hasamuch l'arba. So they would push it forward and they would read on the Monday or the Thursday closest to the 14th. Keitzad, what does that actually look like? Chol arba asar liyas be'echad b'Shabbos. The first case that Rambam gives us is a case where the 14th fell out to be on Sunday. So you can see in the blue square, Yud Daled is a Sunday. When is the earliest, the closest time of gathering to that day? Well, it would be Monday the next day, but we go backwards. Therefore, Makdimin v'koirin b'chamishi, this is the biggest difference, they would go back and read on the Thursday before, Shehu Yom Achad Asar, which is the 11th day of Adar. You see here Yud Aleph has the Megillah icon because Yud Aleph was the day of reading. Purim was on Sunday, they went back to the Thursday before. Chaliyas b'shlishi, if Purim came out to be on Tuesday, as in this case, Yud Aleph is on Tuesday, and the truth is that Rambam doesn't spell it out, but it's the same if it's on Friday. If Purim was on Tuesday or on Friday, Koirin b'sheni, they would read on Monday, Shu Yom Shleisha, which was the day 13th of Adar. In this configuration, the Megillah would be read on the 13th. In this one too. If Purim was Friday, the Megillah was read on Thursday, the 13th. Chaliyas b'Revi, if Purim was on Wednesday, and the truth is, the same would apply on Shabbat. Now we'll talk soon about the Purim falling out on Shabbat. The Mishnah does talk about this case. In today's day and age, we don't do Purim on Shabbos, but let's say it would fall out on Wednesday. Let's go with the Rambam's case first. Koirin b'sheni, you back it up to Monday. That's the day of gathering closest to Purim. Shehu Yom Shnei Asar, which is day 12 of Adar. And again over here, if Purim was on Shabbos, you would back it up to Thursday for day 12 of Adar. So it turns out, if you were following along, that walled cities read on the 15th. Unwalled cities read on the 14th. The villages could read anywhere between the 11th and the 14th. Again, in the first case, if it was Monday or Thursday, they're reading on the 14th. If Purim was Sunday, they're reading on the 11th. If it was Tuesday or Friday, they're reading on the 13th. And if it was Wednesday or Shabbat, they're reading on the 12th. In all of these cases where the villages read the Megillah before the 14th, you cannot read the Megillah with less than 10 Jews, less than a minyan present. What happens if you have a village where they don't even enter, they don't even gather on Mondays or Thursdays? They never gather. They become they're treated like an unwalled city, and they can only read the Megillah on the proper day, the 14th of Adar. On the flip side, if you have a regular unwalled city, not a village, they're not scattered, but there aren't 10 people. Batlanin means people that have no other occupation, and they literally spend their time in shul, there for the needs of the community. If you don't have 10 such people, harehi kikfar, it converts the status of the city into that of a village. And they would read the Megillah earlier on the day of gathering closest to Purim, because otherwise there's no guarantee of having a minyan. They don't have the 10 regular people that just sit in shul and can form a minyan. But if you don't even have 10 people, forget occupation people, there's no 10 adult men in the city, takanasai kalkalasai, the problem becomes the solution. They go back to being considered like members of a big city, and they only read on the 14th alone, of course, with no minyan. Now, I translated the words takanase kalkalase as the difficulty becomes the solution. In other words, the fact that they have no 10 men makes them back into being like a city. The literal translation is the solution becomes the difficulty. In other words, the solution we just gave for allowing you to be considered a village becomes the difficulty in the fact that you don't have 10 people at all, and therefore converts it back to being a city. Either way, the intention is the same. The question is just how to translate it. The Kesef Mishnah, the primary commentator on the Rambam here, goes the first way. That the difficulty becomes a solution, and even though it doesn't fit with the words, he points to places in the Talmud where we have such terminology, and it's okay to say it in that way. Point is, if there aren't 10 adult men, you go like a city, you read on the 14th. Halacha tes. This whole situation, this whole leniency, allowing for villages to read the Megillah early, on the Monday or Thursday before Purim, when does all that apply? When the Jewish people had authority, had kingship, government in Israel. But in our times, unless you're in a walled city, you only read the Megillah in its proper time, day 14 and day 15 of Adar. Members of villages and of cities read the Megillah on the 14th. Members of walled cities read on the 15th. Halacha Yud, how does travel affect the reading of the Megillah? Ben ir shahalach likrach, a ben krach shahalach liir. What if a member of an unwalled city traveled to a walled city? Or a member of a walled city traveled to an unwalled city? And they're there for Purim. Which Purim do you keep? Which day do you read the Megillah? So the Rambam says as follows. Im haya daite lachzer limkaimai bizman kriya. And I'm going to translate this halacha just one of the ways of the commentaries. There's somewhat of a debate how exactly this goes. I'm going to give you one translation. If the person had in mind to return home at the time of reading Megillah, which means at the time of the world at large reading the Megillah, day of the 14th, if the person wanted to be home originally on the 14th of Adar, v'nis ake v'loy chazar, and he was simply held up and didn't end up going home, kairei kim kaimai. This person should read the Megillah the way he would at home, which means that either way, he's going to end up reading the Megillah alone. Because again, if he is a member of an unwalled city who traveled to a walled city, the people of the walled city are reading the Megillah on the 15th. Because he had in mind to be home by the 14th, he needs to read the Megillah on the 14th here by himself. In the flip side case, the person who traveled from the walled city to the unwalled city, he wanted to be home for the 14th already and be able to read the Megillah with his city on the 15th. Just because he's here stuck now on the 14th, we're going to let him and we're going to tell him to actually not read the Megillah today and wait till tomorrow, read the Megillah on the 15th, also alone as he would do at home since he planned to be home. But if he had only planned originally to be home after the time of reading the Megillah, which is again the world at large reading the Megillah, after the 14th, you always read with the people in your locale. And so in this way, you'll always end up with a minyan. If you were in the unwalled city and traveled to the walled city, since you didn't want to be home on the 14th, you're going to read with them on the 15th. And in the other case, if you remember the walled city, traveled to the unwalled city, since you didn't want to be home at the 14th, you wanted to be here, so you're going to read with them here on the 14th. This applies very much nowadays also when travel is so common. People go to visit relatives for Purim, and you have to read the Megillah on this day, that day. You have to know when to read the Megillah. Ukrach, now what counts as a walled city for this mitzvah? The walled city itself, v'chol hasamuch lei, v'chol hanirei imai, and any area close to it, or that's able to be seen from it, im ein beinehem yasar al alpayim amma, if there isn't a distance of more than 2,000 cubits between them, hareze kikrach v'kaydin machamisha, so that area is also considered to be part of the walled city, and they read the Megillah on the 15th. Some commentaries explain this as one big condition. It has to be able to be seen from Jerusalem, from the walled city, and also be within 2,000 cubits. Others say that it's two separate categories. You can be close to the city, even if you're not seen, so long as, that's the caveat of 2,000 cubits, or if you're seen from the city, even if you're more than 2,000 cubits away, you also meet the condition and read the Megillah on the 15th. So that's a matter of debate. Again, if it has to be both or only has to be one. Halacha Yud Aleph, Ir Shehi Safek. What about a city which is in doubt? We don't know when it got its wall. Was it surrounded by a wall in the days of Joshua, or it only was surrounded afterwards? They actually read the Megillah on both days, day 14 and day 15, and the nighttime. They read the Megillah 4 times. But the blessing should only be recited on the 14th day. Since that's when most of the world reads it, so that's when you make the blessing. Even today, there are some people that in the cities in Israel that are under this doubt. In Tzfat, in Haifa, in Ashdod, in Ashkelon, some people read the Megillah on both days in these cities. Halacha Yud Beis. Karu es ha-Megillah ba'adar rishon, va'achar kach ibru beis dinas hashana. If the people in a certain town read the Megillah during the month of Adar, and then the sages, the high court came and made it into a leap year. But today we have our calendar already from Rosh Hashanah. We know that this year 5784 is going to be a leap year, and we're only going to keep Purim in the second Adar. But in times of old, when they were using the moon's testimony, we just came from the laws of Kiddush HaChodesh, we saw that leap years were only announced mid-year. The court would determine whether it had to be a leap year. They wouldn't announce it in the beginning, only later. So what happens if it was the month of Adar? People figured it's Adar, we're going to keep Purim. And then 2 days later comes the message, this year's a leap year. You have to keep a second Adar. What do? Of course, you must go and reread the Megillah in the second month of Adar, which is its proper time. The wording Adar Rishon is a little bit improper because during the time that they read it, it wasn't the first of 2. They didn't know it was going to be the first of 2. They thought it was the one Adar. Some texts of the Rambam actually have Karu es ha-Megillah ba'adar, and then it became a leap year. But of course, retroactively speaking, you can call that Adar the first Adar, which is why this version that we read here has the word Adar Rishon, because it was the first Adar related to the second one that would come out later. Anyway, you read the Megillah again. Yud Gimel, Ein Koden es ha-Megillah b'Shabbos. We cannot read the Megillah on Shabbat. Nowadays, Purim doesn't fall out on Shabbat. But in times of old, it used to be able to fall out on Shabbat. And even nowadays, when Purim for the rest of the world is on Friday, in Jerusalem and in other walled cities, they're keeping the Purim on the 15th of Adar, which is Shabbat. And that halacha applies even today. We do not read the Megillah on Shabbos. Gzeira, for the same reason that we don't shake lulav on Shabbos and we don't blow shofar on Shabbos. It's a decree. Shema yitel oisa biyadai. As a person who wants to fulfill the mitzvah may take the Megillah in his hand, v'yelech etzel mishu ubaki likreisa, and travel to somebody who's expert at reading the Megillah. V'yavirana arba amos p'shus rabim, and in the process, he's going to transfer the Megillah 4 amot, 4 cubits in a public domain, which is forbidden on Shabbos. Shahakol chayavim b'kriyasa v'enakol b'kin b'kriyasa. Everybody has to read the Megillah. Not everyone knows how, so they might carry it to their rabbi or to their friend, and you're going to carry the Megillah on Shabbos, which is forbidden. Lefichach, therefore, im chol zman kriyasa b'Shabbos, if the time of reading comes out on Shabbos. In times of old, even the 14th, but nowadays the 15th, makdimin v'koydin esa koydem haShabbos. The people should read the Megillah before Shabbat. V'shayalin v'dershin b'hilchos Purim b'esa Shabbos. On the Shabbos, which is the day of Purim, you should simply talk about the halachot of Purim, talk about the laws of Purim. Kedei lahazkir shehu Purim, to remind us that it's Purim. Halacha Yudalet, Keita, what does that look like? Yoyim Arba Astar Shechol Lias B'Shabbos. If the 14th of Adar came out to be on Shabbat. Again, doesn't happen nowadays, but it used to happen in times of old. B'nei Ayodes Makdimin B'Korin B'Erev Shabbos. The members of regular cities who should read the Megillah on day 14, they push it forward and they read on Friday. Ubnei Krachim Korin Bizman B'Echel B'Shabbos. People of the walled cities who were anyway scheduled to celebrate Purim on day 15 are going to read the Megillah on Sunday, the regular time. If the 15th of Adar came out to be on Shabbos, B'nei Krakim Makdimin V'Korin B'Erev Shabbos. The people of the walled cities who should have read on Shabbos move the Megillah earlier. They read it on the same day as everybody else on Friday. Shoyem Arba Asar, which is the 14th. Uvnei Ayaris, of course, people of the unwalled cities, regular cities, Korin B'Bayim Sheuzmana, read on that day, which is their time. The Nimtzu Hakoil Korin B'Arba Asar, and so in such a case, you have an occasion where everybody, all Jewish people, are reading the Megillah on day number 14, and the ultimate unity of Israel is created when Purim falls out on Friday, that all Jews read the Megillah on that Friday.